Welcome, everybody. This deep dive and the next one that I share will both be a little different than the others I've posted previously. They're not going to be directly focused on scripture. I titled this deep dive Faith on the Brink: The Role of the Church in a Fragmented America. I hope you stick through this to the end and let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments below. I'm really curious to know what your own opinions are on this. What happens when the spaces that once brought us together, parks, town halls, even front porches, disappear? What fills the void when society's shared identity crumbles into isolated fragments? Today, we're going to examine how America's communities have unraveled and why the Christian church, despite its flaws and challenges, may be our last hope for restoring the true connection and purpose in this divided world. I've said it before, that I have a degree in psychology. But what I didn't say is that my focus of that degree was mental health and research. And that experience and knowledge is going to show itself a little bit in this video. So let's get started. The United States has been heralded for a long time as a melting pot of diverse cultures, ideas, and communities. And central to the cohesion of this society is or was a network of shared spaces and institutions that fostered social interaction, unity, and a sense of purpose across tight-knit communities, but also across the country as a whole. But in recent decades, American society has experienced a profound collapse of these communal structures. The fragmentation of communities, driven by the loss of social interaction and shared spaces, really left a vacuum that few institutions could actually fill. One institution, however, stands resilient amidst this decline: the Christian church. Nevertheless, even the church has been facing existential threats, both from external pressures, notably leftist ideologies, and internal vulnerabilities. This discussion that we're having now explores these dynamics, drawing on academic research and cultural analysis to argue that the church remains the final bastion of community in America, though its survival is increasingly precarious. Shared spaces, whether physical, cultural, or digital, are critical to the health of any society. They provide arenas where individuals of diverse backgrounds can interact, form relationships, and build a collective identity. Robert Putnam's seminal work, Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community, highlights the erosion of these spaces in America. He documented a sharp decline in social capital as evidenced by diminished participation in civic organizations, community events, and even informal social gatherings. The decline of shared spaces has fragmented communities, contributing to loneliness, alienation, and distrust. The rise of digital technology, though promising greater connectivity, has paradoxically exacerbated social isolation. Sherry Turkle, in her book Alone Together: Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other, argues that while social media platforms create virtual shared spaces, they lack the depth and authenticity of face-to-face interactions. The shift toward individualism, although a staple in American culture, and digital interaction has eroded traditional venues for social cohesion, such as town squares, neighborhood associations, not HOAs, and local clubs. Economic factors have also played a role in the decline. The disappearance of manufacturing jobs and the rise of corporate globalization has really decimated small towns and local economies, further dismantling community structures. The economic dislocation often manifests in increased mobility as families relocate in search of work, severing ties to their local communities. Furthermore, a lack of economic stability forces more familial movement, maybe between towns or cities, sometimes from one state to another. Throughout American history, the Christian church has functioned as a cornerstone of community life. Churches provide not only a place for worship, but also a hub for social interaction, mutual aid, and cultural preservation. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his classic Democracy in America from 1835, observed that the church in America served as a moral and social compass, fostering civic engagement and collective purpose. In contemporary America, the church remains one of the few institutions where intergenerational and cross-socioeconomic interactions occur. Research by Smith in 2017 in Religion and American Public Life underscores the church's role in building social capital, especially in underserved communities. Churches facilitate volunteering, charity, and mentorship, creating networks of support that extend beyond the congregation and back out into the society. Moreover, the church serves as a repository of shared values and traditions. In an increasingly polarized and fragmented society, the church's teachings offer a moral framework that transcends partisan divides by grounding its members in a shared narrative centered on life, death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The church fosters unity and purpose in an age of relativism and cynicism. Despite its enduring importance, the Christian church faces mounting threats from external forces. Chief among these is the rise of leftist ideologies that prioritize secularism, individual autonomy, and cultural relativism over communal and religious value. These ideologies often depict the church as a regressive institution, out of step with contemporary norms surrounding gender, sexuality, and social justice. But this is where the church should reside, grounded in the Bible and not fluid to the movements of society. Secularization theory provides a framework for understanding this dynamic. According to Norris and Englehart in Sacred and Secular Religion and Politics Worldwide, as societies become more affluent and educated, they tend to move away from religious practices. In the United States, this trend has been accelerated by a cultural shift that equates religion with oppression and intolerance. For example, the New Atheism movement, popularized by figures like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, frames religious belief as antithetical to reason and progress. Public policy and legal challenges have also contributed to the church's marginalization. Cases like Burwell versus Hobby Lobby stores in 2014 highlight the tension between religious freedom and progressive social agendas. Efforts to remove religious symbols from public spaces, restrict faith-based education, and compel religious organizations to comply with the secular mandates further undermine the church's influence. That being said, it's extremely important to remember that the separation of church and state should be kept separate. Incursions into the state by the church open the door for reciprocating action, that of the state into the church. These walls that we put up to separate the church and the state play an important role. Yes, the walls should keep the Christian church out of government, but it also keeps out other religions as well, with the goal of keeping a neutral ground upon which governance can be done without influence from any religion, Christian or not. While external pressures are significant, the Christian church also faces internal vulnerabilities that threaten its role as a bastion of community. One major challenge is theological division. Denominationalism, though historically a source of richness and diversity, has often led to a fragmentation and competition among churches. This division weakens the church's collective voice and diminishes its capacity to address societal challenges. Another internal threat is the church's increasing accommodation to cultural trends. We kind of talked about this earlier. In an effort to remain relevant, some churches have diluted their theological distinctiveness, adopting a seeker-sensitive model that prioritizes entertainment and consumer appeal over doctrinal fidelity. And there lies irony in this, because the relevance that churches have doesn't come from secularism. It comes from God and the church's role in society. Research by Kinman and Lyons in Good Faith, Being a Christian When Society Thinks You're Irrelevant and Extreme, suggests that this trend has alienated both longtime members and potential converts who seek authenticity rather than superficiality. The rise of the prosperity gospel further illustrates this internal erosion. Prominent megachurch, televangelists, and leaders have redefined Christianity as a pathway to personal success and material wealth, which undermines the church's prophetic witness and communal ethic. This shift has not only disillusioned many believers, but also provided critics with the ammunition to dismiss the church as hypocritical and self-serving. Remember that Jesus taught to give away our wealth to the poor, for it's better to be a poor man than a rich man, who will have a harder time getting to heaven. And so teachings of Jesus are quite opposite of the prosperity gospel when it comes to wealth, making the denomination dangerous. The church's ability to function as a communal anchor is intricately tied to its navigation of the delicate balance between religious freedom and the separation of church and state. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution enshrines this balance, ensuring that the state neither imposes religious practices nor prohibits the free exercise of religion. For the church to thrive, it needs to stay in its own lane by respecting the pluralistic fabric of American society. This means avoiding efforts to mandate the display of religious symbols in public spaces or to impose religious ideologies through legislation. just as the church seeks to protect its independence from government interference. It must also honor the boundary that prevents it from wielding undue influence over public institutions. By focusing on its mission of spiritual transformation and service, rather than political power, the church can maintain its integrity and effectiveness. Conversely, the state must refrain from encroaching upon churches' rights, particularly in the realm of faith-based education, religious gatherings, and the autonomy of religious organizations. Protecting this balance ensures that both entities can coexist without infringing upon one another, fostering a society where religious expression is respected but not imposed. I want to read a short story about why this is important. Now, the next bit is completely fictional, as an example of what could happen. It's the year 2045. The newly elected government of the fictional nation of Concordia enacted the Unified Faith Act, declaring that the state would officially adopt and enforce the doctrines of the Evangelical Covenant Church as the nation's sole expression of Christianity. The ECC had long been known for its emphasis on personal piety and communal worship, but its theological stance on baptism, insisting on infant baptism as a means for salvation, became the cornerstone of the government's mandate. But to align all denominations with this doctrine, the government established a Bureau of Religious Conformity. The churches across the nation were required to re-register with the state and affirm the ECC's baptismal theology. Clergy unwilling to comply faced the revocation of their license to preach and operate as religious leaders. One of the first changes was a state-mandated alteration of baptism and the way that it was practiced. Denominations like Baptist and Pentecostals, which traditionally emphasized believers' baptism, performed on those who profess personal faith, were forced to adopt infant baptism. The government argued that this shift was necessary to create a unified religious identity and prevent spiritual fragmentation. The impact was immediate and profound. For the Baptists, their churches faced an existential crisis. Congregants protested the change, arguing that faith must be a personal decision, not one imposed on infancy. Many churches went underground, forming clandestine networks to continue their practices. For Pentecostal denominations, which valued the public declaration of faith and baptism by immersion, they saw this as a betrayal of their core belief. Some leaders attempted to comply outwardly, while secretly teaching their members the old practices. For Catholics and Orthodox Christians, while these traditions also practiced infant baptism, they were unsettled by the state's reinterpretation of this theology. The ECC doctrine excluded the Catholic and Orthodox view of baptism as a sacrament that worked ex operato by the act itself. This exclusion led to tensions, as Catholic and Orthodox communities were publicly labeled as partially aligned with the state doctrine, subjecting them to discrimination and reduced religious freedoms by other groups. Families were torn apart, as parents who rejected the state doctrine were fined or even imprisoned for refusing to baptize their infants in the mandated way. Schools integrated the state-approved catechism into their curriculum, forcing children from dissenting families to learn theology that contradicted their traditions. And finally, a coalition of diverse Christian denominations banded together to oppose the government's overreach. They published a manifesto titled "The Faith Beyond Borders," arguing for religious liberty and the right to practice faith according to conscience. And by the year 2055, the movement had grown so strong that the government's authority over religious practices was challenged in international courts. The eventual ruling declared Concordia's imposition of a single denomination doctrine violated fundamental human rights. However, the scars of division lingered for decades, leaving a complex legacy of resistance, faith, and the danger of intertwining state powers with religious doctrine. This story illustrates the dangers of mingling the church with the state. Even through the various denominations within Christianity itself, dangers arise when this overlap of church and state happens. And churches, church leaders, and politicians who suggest that laws be created based on their beliefs should tread carefully. Here's an example. The government is proposing a new law banning spousal abuse because it's a violation of human rights and dignity. The law is grounded in evidence showing that spousal abuse leads to severe psychological harm, physical harm, and societal instability. The policy is supported by secular principles such as equality, justice, and the protection of vulnerable individuals, ensuring that all citizens, regardless of religion or belief, are treated with dignity and respect. This is great. This is a good law. This is going to be helpful to communities. Here's the same law from a different perspective. The government proposes a law banning spousal abuse because particular religious texts declare the husband should love their wives as Christ loved the church. While this religious sentiment is noble, the law's foundation on this specific belief inherently ties its justification to the religion's teachings. And of course, somebody that has this point of view is going to say, yes, but Christ's love is universal and everybody is welcome in his church and all these things, right? But it doesn't cross the aisle. It doesn't cross that bridge that separates the believers from the non-believers. And thus you have the problem, even though it's based in Christ, which is the deepest base you can make. If the other side doesn't believe, then they have no reason to follow the law. And so it's important that the separation of church and state should be maintained. Your beliefs might guide you to make the decisions that are necessary. They might guide you to make laws that help people. But when it comes time to write that law, it needs to be based in evidence. It needs to be based in something that reaches across the aisle and grabs the attention of everybody, regardless of their belief. The state has to maintain that distance from religion. It can't intermingle. It's important to understand that despite all the challenges that the church has had, the Christian church retains the potential to serve as the final bastion of community in America. Its resilience lies in its ability to offer what no other institution can, the transcendent purpose rooted in divine love and eternal hope. The church's emphasis on fellowship, service, and spiritual growth addresses the deepest human needs for belonging, meaning, and redemption. To fulfill this role, the church must reclaim its prophetic voice and resist the twin temptations of compromise and complacency. This involves reaffirming its commitment to biblical truth, even when such truth is unpopular or countercultural. It requires fostering genuine relationships within the congregation, prioritizing discipleship and mentorship over programs and events. The church must also engage the broader culture with both grace and conviction. Timothy Keller argues in Center Church, Doing Balanced Gospel-Centered Ministry in Your City, he writes that effective cultural engagement requires balancing contextualization with fulfillment to the gospel. By addressing societal issues such as racial reconciliation, economic inequality, and mental health from a biblical perspective, the church can demonstrate its relevance and compassion in a fragmented world. So in conclusion, the collapse of American society and the fragmentation of communities through the loss of social interaction and shared spaces present profound challenges. Yet the Christian church remains uniquely positioned to address these challenges, offering a vision of community rooted in divine love and shared purpose. To fulfill this role, the church has to navigate external threats and internal vulnerabilities with courage, wisdom, and faith. And at the same time, the church needs to respect that separation of church and state, ensuring that its influence is exercised through service and example rather than coercion. By maintaining this balance, the church can preserve its integrity and continue to serve as a beacon of hope in an increasingly fragmented society. As American communities search for meaning and connection, the church's mission should be to love, serve, and lead by example, and it's more important and vital than ever.